Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. I know you'll be glad that you did because all of us need to know what is happening with our credit scores, and they do change regularly, that information. I'm Rita Wolfson, the founder of Financial Social Work and the Financial Health and Wellness Professional Community. With me today is Olga Potanin, and you will see her in the chat or in the she'll be taking questions, and she's always such a big help. And most importantly, our guest speaker today is Rod Griffin, and he has been kind enough the past few years to do this annual update on credit reporting and on um, all of the things that we need to know. According to the consumer reporting agency Experian, and we are big fans of Experian. So I will let Rod tell you more about himself when I turn the session over to him in a little bit. But first, I do want to welcome all of you personally so that you know that everything we do is also meant to improve your own financial futures, as well as professionally to add new tools to your client toolbox. So you can check the chat box for messages. We don't share slides, they are proprietary, but the recording will be on our website, Facebook page, and YouTube channel within a day or so. And we will email that recording to those of you registered. You can type your questions into the question box, and we'll answer as many of them as time permits. There are no CEs or certificates of attendance for this webinar, just great content. So as we prepare to talk about all things money, I suggest everyone take a deep breath and center yourself. Money talk brings up lots of thoughts, feelings, attitudes. And so the more centered we are, the more prepared we are to hear these important messages. I like to start these trainings with our financial social work affirmation because I feel that it really captures the work I've spent the past 26 years of my life doing. It goes, just for today, I will love myself enough to face my fears, practice self-acceptance, and embrace hope. Silence my inner critic, speak my truth, and make peace with myself and with my past. Just for today, I will give myself permission to eliminate toxic people, beliefs, and behaviors from my life and prepare for a better tomorrow by healing my relationship with my money and with myself today. So, just going to tell you a little bit about financial social work. And if you're new to our monthly free webinar, you'll understand why we do it. And we do it because while no one chooses to have money problems, most people do. And we want to help those people. And financial social work is the intersection of social work, politics, the economy, gender, economic, and social justice, and all in equity. It is a behavioral model because until and unless behavior changes, nothing changes. The psychosocial component explores the financial thoughts, feelings, attitudes, beliefs, experiences, and values we each have that drive our financial behavior, which is how we earn, spend, save, share, and borrow. The work is interactive, reflective, supportive, engaging, all of these components that contribute to sustainable long-term financial behavioral change. It is holistic, multidisciplinary, hopeful and helpful, successful individually with clients and in groups. The work is heart-centered. It approaches money and life from a perspective of healing, acceptance, courage, wellness, and honesty. The very core of my work is healing the relationship we each have with our money and the relationship we each have with ourselves. That's where change comes from. So we have graduates, thousands of graduates across the country and around the world. And now it gives me great pleasure to turn over this training to Rod. Do you want to take it, Rod?
I can take it from here.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rita. I will switch there. And then I can find the right screen to share. Show my. No. PowerPoint. There. Can you see my PowerPoint, Rita?
We can. Perfect.
All right. Fantastic. And thank you so much for the introduction and the opportunity to speak to everybody today. I truly enjoy these programs. Rather than talk about the basics of credit reporting and scoring, I get to talk about things that I'm seeing and hearing and changes that are happening in our industry and share information I think will be very helpful to all of you. But of course, if you have questions about credit reports or scores generally and the information in them, how they work, I'm happy to respond to those questions too. By way of a bit further introduction, I'm Senior Director of Consumer Education and Advocacy for Experian. I've been with the company now 26 years, a little more than 26 years, which seems impossible, but it's been a great opportunity. And I think, Rita, you and I have been working together for nearly that long. We met a long time ago, so I'm glad to speak to everyone and hope to answer any questions you have, but want to share some things we're seeing in the industry that I think will be helpful or at least informative for everyone to watch for as we move forward in the next months and years, and be able to help share information with people about what's happening, what they might expect. Today, I want to talk a bit about some changes that have happened most recently, particularly around medical collections and what's changed there over the last year or so. I'll share some information about new credit data and reporting tools that are empowering consumers, some updates we've made. If some of you were on during our last call last year, I mentioned Experian Boost. There have been some updates I want to share, as well as a new product or service that we've introduced that takes that to another level. I'll talk a bit about credit scores and how they are changing. I'll share some information from VantageScore and how they're beginning to discuss their credit scores and share some of my thoughts about it, and talk a bit about FICO's new models and how they may be managing new, or what we think of as expanded FCRA data, information that's not traditionally part of a credit report that we're seeing more and more of. I'll discuss what we know thus far about the implications of the end of student loan forbearance and what's happening with the federal student loan changes. I'll speak a little bit to buy now, pay later programs and the fact that they're still the wild, wild west of lending. They're out there and people love them, and I'm not sure how I feel about them. And I want to touch base on something I hear frequently that people are confused about regarding public records and credit reports and the changes we've made over the last couple of years there, so that you have some background. And from there, I'll answer any questions you have. But I'll jump right into medical debt. Currently, medical debts appear after becoming collection accounts. They are not reported to us as a medical debt to date. We've begun making changes, or actually began making changes about 2 years ago. We increased the time that we held medical collections from 6 months to a year before they appear on a credit report. So if a medical collection goes to, or if a medical account goes to, or medical debt goes to collections, we will not include it in a credit report until it's been in collections for 12 months or a full year. That helps to ensure that if there's a billing error or an insurance dispute, things of that sort, that it can be resolved, and so would never affect the credit report itself. And there have been changes to the credit scoring systems over the last several years, particularly FICO, as well as Vantage Score, with regard to the way that they manage and respond to medical collections. They've actually changed their algorithms to recognize medical collections as different from other types of collections, and they have less impact on the scores when they appear in a credit report than a traditional account. So I think that's important to understand as well. And now I'm having some problems with my, hang on just a moment, I want to try to change one thing really quickly. Now it's not going to let me because it doesn't like that. What has happened? Give me just a moment. I need to. My Teams system is interfering with the.
Do you want us to put up the presentation?
Nope, I got it. I just needed to quit the Teams program. It's a challenge. That's not part of my presentation, but I could do like an hour on how the Teams software is really challenging. So, but I won't do that. Medical collections, back to medical collections, and now I'm refocused. So the scoring systems have changed and weigh medical collections differently than they have in the past. I say future, but effective now, so no longer the future. As of July, paid medical collections have been removed from credit reports. So if you have a medical collection and you see it in your credit report, you should dispute that. We will remove it. We should have already removed them from all of the reports. They should be gone. So if you pay off a medical collection, they're no longer included in a credit history. I mentioned that the time period before medical collection will be added is now a full 12 months. We also have now removed medical debts of less than $500 as of the second quarter of this year. So June, July, early July timeframe. So we have now removed more than 70% of medical collections that appeared in credit histories. It's really a fairly rare occurrence now for a medical collection to appear, and would have to be a year old and be more than $500 for it to become part of a credit report. In the past, there actually was a fairly small percentage of the population with credit reports, of the 220 million people or so who had credit reports, that actually had medical collections appearing. And the doorbell rang. Hang on just a moment. I'm so sorry. Real life seems to be happening today. So despite closing all of the blinds and all of the doors and telling people that I'm in a presentation, the doorbell rang. Go figure. And I have two little dogs, as you can tell, who are much louder than their size would suggest. I apologize for that. So medical collections today are relatively uncommon in credit reports at this point. So you need not. So if you have medical collections, certainly still a serious issue, but becoming less so. And I think that's something that's important to understand, that for the most part, you shouldn't see them very often. And if you do, there should have been time to resolve any billing errors, insurance disputes, or it would be a fairly significant debt that's still owed. So one of the biggest changes that we've seen in credit histories, and we've removed most of those medical debts. I mentioned alternative data and what we think of as expanded FCRA data. I wanted to share a bit about Experian Boost. I talked about the Experian Boost product last year. It's been around now about 5 years, 4 years, going on 5 years. It's a tool, if you're not familiar with it, that is free to consumers. You just go to experian.com/boost and you enroll in the service. It's permission-based. And what it does is enable people to have their positive cell phone payments, their positive utility payments for things like natural gas, water, electricity, their positive cell phone, positive streaming service payments for things like Netflix or Hulu, HBO Plus, reported to their credit report. And most recently, we added the ability to have your rent payments reported. It's all positive information. The reason that we developed Experian Boost is that cell phone companies, utility companies, rental and property management companies typically do not. Why is it doing that? I'm closing all of my other software. So those kinds of organizations do not typically report positive information. If you don't pay your cell phone bill, it could get sent to collections, and it would then be reported to Experian and the other credit reporting companies. So it could hurt your credit history if you don't pay those bills on time, but you didn't get any benefit if you did pay them on time. Experian spent about 3 years studying those kinds of payments and the impact of positive information and whether or not it was truly an indicator of better financial capability, and whether or not making those payments on time represented lower lending risk. And we found that they did, in fact, by adding that information, indicate a person was a better credit risk than perhaps their credit history showed, especially if they had a thin credit file, fewer than 5 accounts, or very short credit history. But they were indicative and accurately predicted better credit risk if that information was included. But because those companies don't report to us directly, we developed Boost so that the consumer could do it themselves if they chose to. So that's what Experian Boost does. You enroll in Boost, you tell us what account you pay your cell phone payment through, or your utilities through, or streaming services, or your rent through, whether it's a checking account, a savings account, or the credit card. And you give us permission to access those payments each month, the ones that you tell us you would like us to include in your report. And we add each of them as a separate account, very much like an installment loan or a credit card account, and capture up to 2 years of information. That information instantly becomes part of the credit history. And as part of the process, we provide a free credit reporting score when you start the enrollment, and we provide another credit reported score at the end, so you can see what's happened, if there's been improvement. 2 out of 3 people see an improvement in their credit scores. It's particularly true for people with, as I said, thin credit files or FICO 8 scores of less than 680. So subprime or near prime kinds of scores or lower. And that's what it's really about, is helping people gain access to the credit reporting system to show that they're perhaps a better credit risk than their credit history would otherwise indicate, so that they can begin to access and take advantage of lower cost, non-predatory financial services and really get credit where credit is due. For people with strong credit scores, you likely won't see much change because you're already doing all the right things. And I talk to people and they tell me, well, you know, I have someone who's trying to buy a car and they just need 6 more points if they boost their score. Will it help them get there? Well, it might not, but that's not the purpose. Experian Boost isn't really meant to get a person across the finish line. It's about helping a person get in the race and giving them the tools to be successful in that race, to help them be more financially healthy over time and to have access when otherwise they may not. And so I always, tell people that you don't look at it as a way to get a few more points to get the big screen TV right before the Super Bowl. If you need those points, you're probably doing some things you shouldn't be anyway, and having some challenges with your finances. You don't need another debt that would probably make things worse, not better. But if you are just starting out, it can be a great tool. The big change is rent. We're working with about 1,500 of the largest property management companies in the country, as well as a number of online rent payment organizations. So if you're working with them, if you're making your payments through one of them, you'll be able to include those rent payments, and they will report to us for you as part of your credit report. Again, it's permission based, and we find that that's incredibly helpful. And I think it's something, when you look at what's happening in the economy right now and the challenges people have. We just did a survey just in the last few weeks that we've been doing some media work with and sharing out, that rent prices in some parts of the country have slowed down or are not going up, and that 2% fewer people as compared to last year are telling us that they don't have to adjust their budget to cover their rent costs, so they don't have to cut spending somewhere else to pay their rent. But that 2% represents a change from 86% of the population saying they had to change their budget to 84% of the population that was surveyed. So the vast majority still are struggling, or at least taking steps to make sure they can pay their rent on time. So having rent act as a positive tool to help you build your credit history can be very powerful, because with a better credit history, what we know is you can qualify for accounts with lower interest rates, better terms. You can negotiate more effectively with your lenders, and that can help save you money and help you take better control of your personal finances. And that's empowering for people, and that's what Boost is really developed for. It's not about helping people get over that last bit to take on more debt. It's about helping people gain access to a system when they haven't had access before, or have had very little access, and are able then to use a credit report to their advantage, and to use information that wasn't before to their advantage. And in addition to that, last year we added another service called Experian Go that people should be aware of. Experian Go is a tool that helps a person who is credit invisible, who has no credit history whatsoever in our systems, create a credit report from essentially nothing. What we do, and the reason we developed it, is there are about 28 million consumers who are credit invisible. We know that Black and Hispanic consumers are adversely represented in that population. More than 26% of Black and Hispanic consumers are credit invisible. We know that about 4 million consumers turn 18 every year and typically don't have a credit history, but may need that history to work for them as they go into the workforce or into college. I always remind people that only about 25% of our population get college degrees. So somewhere between 70 and 80% of our population do not go to college or don't complete a college degree. And we forget that, I think, too often. And so, a large number of students who are graduating from high school are going directly into the workforce, not thinking about those who dropped out before they even got to graduation. So I think that's an important thing to remember, that 18-year-olds are going into the workforce. They need access to financial services, and having a credit history can help them do that. My grandson is one of them, and he actually called me and asked about credit reporting and what he could do to build his credit report. And I told him to do this, use Experian Go and use Experian Boost. The reason that we developed Experian Go is, as I said, it helps overcome the barrier of financial invisibility and credit invisibility, so that you can gain access to financial tools that you otherwise couldn't. Things like payday lending, title loans are those predatory traps that people get caught in because they don't have a credit history, because they don't have access to other financial tools. And having a credit history is also important. Accessing other kinds of banking relationships, think just like checking accounts or savings accounts, often involve looking at a credit report and having an existing credit history. So by helping people create a credit history, we're able to help them overcome those barriers to financial inclusion. It's one of the important components. It's a key to being financially successful. And we're trying to find innovative ways to help break those cycles of credit invisibility and predatory lending that people get trapped in. So what happens with Experian Go is you use your mobile device to enroll in our app. It's a free app, and we will check to see if you have a credit report. If you don't, we automatically launch Experian Go. We'll ask you for some identifying information, name, address, social security number, date of birth, and so on. We'll ask you for a selfie. That's a live selfie, so you have to wink or smile, do something that we know that you're actually there. It's not just a photograph. And we'll create what is essentially an empty credit report with just identifying information. From there, once that's established, if you have cell phone accounts or utility accounts, you're paying rent, you have streaming services, you can enroll in Experian Boost and add those accounts to your credit report. What we have found is that there are people who tell us that they, in a matter of just minutes, moved from having no credit history whatsoever to having a FICO 8 score in the 630 range in some cases, so more than 600. Not a great score, but it's a start, and that's where you need to begin. It gets you up that first step. So with Experian Go and Experian Boost, we're trying to find ways to help people overcome those barriers to access to lower cost, non-predatory financial relationships and opportunities. And it's free, and again, it's permission-based with Experian Boost. And we want to make sure we get people into the credit reporting system and still give them control over the information as much as possible. And so that's what that's all about. I wanted to let you know about Experian Go because it's brand new. You just go to the Experian app, download it, and follow the instructions. Really simple to do. I want to touch a bit on sort of the evolution of credit scores, and in the case of VantageScore, the change or the shift in the way that they're talking about credit scores and their newest scores. The cube represents, and this is directly from VantageScore, the cube represents what they like us to talk about and want us to talk about from a scoring perspective relative to VantageScore. They don't like to talk about percentages. You always see the pie charts with, payment history is X percent and utilization rates another X percent and so on. They want to describe what a person needs to do to have good credit scores and what's directional in behavior to have good credit scores. And so the cube does that in terms of what goes into a credit report. So if you imagine the pie charts that you often see, these categories are the ones we always look at. But instead of putting percentages to them, they describe what's most important. And the shift that I see in this cube, and the hesitation I have, is they talk about total credit usage, balance, and available credit. That's the utilization rate component as being extremely influential. Credit mix and experience is highly influential. Payment history, they describe as moderately influential. Age of history is less influential, and new accounts opened is less influential to the score. Over time, those descriptions are true. If you are over time keeping your balances on your credit cards low and your available credit high, and you are using different types of credit, and you have a good mix of credit and a longer history, they are going to be highly influential in building a strong credit score and a high credit score over time. However, the payment history, when it's described as moderately influential, you're looking at a credit history over a number of years or decades. That's likely true because the other two things are weighing more heavily in your credit history if you're making those payments on time. The challenge I have, and I share this with VantageScore, is that the question asked is, what if you miss a payment, even though you've had years of good credit history? What happens to your score? And the answer is it tanks. So payment history is moderately influential so long as it's positive over a long period of time, over years. But if you miss a payment, it's going to hurt your credit scores immediately and seriously. And so when you look at their descriptions on the left, They talk about credit usage balance and available credit, and say that you should only use 30% of your total credit available to you. That's the total utilization rate. That's not a target or a goal. I would share that with people too, that it's a point at which your scores begin to drop more rapidly. If you increase utilization rate over time, even a few percentage points, it's going to have an effect on scores, just not as much and not as fast as when you hit that 30% limit. Credit mix should be varied, include different types of credit. That happens over time. Then when you get to payment history, they say their first sentence is payment history is important to lenders, and it most certainly is. If you miss even one payment, your score suffers. So that kind of, to me, contradicts the moderately influential message. It is extremely influential. And so when I talk to people, what I describe in this case is that payment history is, in my view, still the most important factor in credit scores across the board, including Vantage score, even though they'll argue with me about that. And the reason I say that is, as long as your payments are on time, the other factors begin to weigh more heavily. But missing a payment, doesn't matter how long you've had good credit, it's going to wreck your scores. So payment history, you must have your payments on time every single time. And I've not seen any evidence that that's changed. But if you're talking to someone about how do I get from a 700 to an 850, the answer is, well, you have to have gray hair like Rod, because the longer you use credit and you make those payments on time, and the lower your balances are, that score will grow, because time is a critical factor. So I think it's interesting that they're working on how to describe what you need to do to have better credit scores, but not talking about percentages. And they don't like percentages, and I understand exactly why. When you see Vantage Score 4.0, for example, the payment history is 41% of the score, according to their chart from a year or so ago. But that is probably true for an individual very rarely. That's just sort of the average, if you will. For most people, it will either be less than that if they're making all their payments on time, or it could be higher than that if they're having some problems. That percentage for FICO and Vantage Score and every other score is dependent on the individual's credit history. So the longer your history is, with the longer string of payments that are on time, the less impactful that will be on the score. The more recent a late payment is, the more late payments you have, the more impactful it will be on the score, especially if it's related to other factors like having high utilization or a short credit history. All those things weigh in, and those numbers shift. So, people will say, well, I get that, and I got my score, and it doesn't match that number. It probably won't in terms of an exact percentage, but it's going to be in that neighborhood, and it gives you a sense of how things are weighed. So I just find this very interesting, and the discussion around it very interesting, because it's true that balance and utilization is extremely influential, probably the most important over time, as long as your payments are on time. Credit mix is highly influential, and payment history will be moderately influential, assuming you're making payments on time. And doing those things in that order will help you have a stronger, higher credit score over time. But if you miss a payment, it's still going to be the most significant factor. So I think it's important for people to understand that to have great scores, you have to be all boring and consistent, keep your balances low. And if you do that, you will eventually have really strong scores. But if you miss a payment, it's going to derail you. So that's the Vantage Score, and one of the things I've been finding very interesting in those discussions. With FICO, the question I have is, will new models manage, or are they developing new models to manage new data? And their strategy's been a bit different. With FICO, the newest scoring models, FICO 10, FICO 10T, and FICO XD, do incorporate and recognize new kinds of information, like information around rent or utilities or transaction data, those sorts of things, telco. but their older models do not. FICO 10 is interesting. FICO 10T is even more interesting. Currently, FICO 8 is the predominant model in the industry and in the marketplace. FICO 10 is being evaluated. It will probably take a couple of more years before you see it used widely by lenders and others. It takes a long time to validate, test, and then implement new scoring models. In mortgage industry, they're still using FICO 2, and that's largely the result of policies by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac around what scores they need to see in order to buy a mortgage on the secondary market. And there's movement in that arena. There have been some findings and some announcements recently from regulatory agencies that other models can be used and that they want to open up competitiveness in the mortgage market. I think that's going to be hugely valuable. I think new models will help consumers qualify in larger numbers because they will look at the newest kinds of information. FICO 2 is at least 15 years old, so ancient in relative to credit reporting and scoring and technology. So it's important that they be updated. I should also let you know that with mortgage lending, Boost does not affect mortgage decisions or mortgage scores or scores used in mortgage lending, because we recognize that they are essentially outdated models and they react incorrectly to new data. And so we simply do not feed that information into those scores, so they won't affect them. So they won't, Experian Boost won't directly affect mortgage applications, but it will help you build that credit history over time, qualify for more traditional accounts that would. And so it's a step to get you moving on that path. It's not the key to getting across the finish line. So I will share that. FICO 10T is interesting because the T stands for trended data. Currently, credit scores look at the information in a credit report as a snapshot at that instant in time. So if you get a credit report now, you score it with a FICO score, Vantage score, it's looking at that information in that instant. If 10 minutes later, you pull the report and a new score will be calculated. And if something's changed, it will represent that information. Trended data is going to be interesting because it's looking at not only the snapshot at the moment in time, but the behavior and payment history over time and incorporating that into the score. So if a person, for instance, has seasonal employment and they have periods where they may fall behind a bit on their obligations, but then catch up and pay off obligations at another period in the year, and they consistently pay those debts as agreed in the end, but perhaps have some up and down, trended data will help recognize that. And it could help people who are not able to qualify with traditional scores actually be approved because it's able to recognize that they are managing their credit well. It will also help lenders recognize people who may have less visible but trending negative behavior, so they're falling behind and then not paying off and are doing that consistently over time, or moving in that direction and not qualified. So we'll help manage risk generally at the fringes of lending, because we're very good at predicting prime borrowers, who's going to pay it back. But when you start getting toward the borrowers who are more marginal, it's harder, and trended data could help with that. In terms of alternative data, FICO XD is FICO's answer to the kinds of data and information you see in the boxes on the left. Again, this is from FICO as well. FICO XD is what I think of as an additive score. So if a person applies for credit and a traditional FICO score isn't good enough to qualify them, the lender can ask for a FICO XD score, have it calculated. It will look at other kinds of information, trade line data, transaction level data, demand deposit accounts, telco, utility, retail, so on, that may be in the credit report, and it could qualify those individuals because it takes a look at different kinds of information. But it's a secondary score; it's not incorporated into their traditional scores. That said, FICO 8, FICO 9, FICO 10 do incorporate the Boost data and other non-traditional data. So It's a little different approach, not widely accepted yet or employed, but interesting nonetheless, that there are other scores that are solely looking at alternative or expanded FCRA data. The boxes on the right I find interesting too, because it kind of is a list of all of the things that could be considered, but I would stress not all of it is because it's not in a credit report. We certainly aren't collecting all of this information, and so wouldn't necessarily be there. I kind of point to the green box. Some of the there's been some talk around particularly psychometric survey data and social networks data. I can tell you that neither of those is anywhere close to being included in a credit report or credit scores in the US, because we already do a much better job with the traditional and FCRA regulated data. And to include something like that, one, we don't know how predictive it is, especially if you look at social network data. So things like Facebook or X, which is Twitter, Threads is developing that kind of information. One, I have no idea how you would make that comply with Fair Credit Reporting Act regulations. Two, I don't know how you could see it as predictive of behavior because it's so subjective and interesting, but it's not going to be included in credit reports in any horizon that I see in the US at this point. However, it is being used in places like Southeast Asia where they don't have an established credit system, and they find, particularly for small business owners and micro business owners, lots of activity on a business's social media accounts, especially when those responses and the social media interactions are positive, are a good sign that they are doing well and actually are predictive of being able to pay a business debt. So they're starting to use that in some parts of the world, not in the US. So when you see that brought up in news and things, and I've seen a few things where they say that they're starting to consider or use social media information, not true. We're nowhere near that at this point. So we find it very interesting. Also want to touch on student loan forbearance. Of course, that all the policies have changed. Student loan forbearance is ending, and people are going to be faced with resuming those payments. We don't yet know what our requirements will be in terms of how it's reported. That will be dependent on the loan servicers and the administration's requirements, regulations, and the regulators. What we do know is that for accounts in forbearance, when that repayment resumes, they will resume where the consumer's payments left off. They will not suddenly become a year delinquent. They will be, if they were current when the forbearance began, payments will resume and the account will still be current. That's what forbearance is about. No payments were due. What we don't know is if there are balloon payments or if there are other requirements, how those loan servicers will report the information, if there will be other kinds of stipulations around when an account becomes considered delinquent or seriously delinquent, or how it will be reported. We're waiting for the administration to tell us that. There is kind of bottom line, lots of wringing of hands and gnashing of teeth about how borrowers will manage the debt as well. We don't know, suddenly people aren't going to be able to. Rita and I were talking yesterday, and we know that auto loans have skyrocketed. And I've also heard from people who have said that they're going to have difficulty paying their student loans because they bought a new car, and the new car loan is 7 years and like $50,000. Don't know what we do about that. There's a decision-making process there. I just saw a news story that Cadillac has come out with its newest EV, and it's as much as $130,000. So I don't know how we buy cars, manage student loans at the same time. But that's going to be something that we're going to be watching to see what happens with student loans. What we know from history is that for the most part, people with higher dollar student loans manage them better than people with low dollar student loans. So if a person has student loans that are $10,000 or under, which was kind of the average student loan debt that was falling behind, actually, And typically it were students who, in my view, and my lawyers would like me to say this is my opinion, these are my opinions and mine alone, but students who were convinced to enroll at a private school or university and to take out student loans to pay for the education when that school should have known or did know that those students were not academically prepared to succeed and didn't provide resources to help them succeed. And when they left the school and couldn't complete their degree, they were left with debt. And often not a lot of debt, but they also were left with no degree and no marketing, no marketable skills. They couldn't find jobs, and now they're stuck with that debt. So they couldn't pay it. To me, those people, and this is my view, they need to be made whole. If you're doing well as a doctor or a lawyer, most of those seem to be paying on time and managing them well. The higher paid positions and professions with the greater student loan debt, ironically, seem to be doing well. And only about 14% of credit reports have student loans in them. I think that's something to think about from what the overall picture will be with credit scores and credit reporting from a macro perspective. It's
Rod,
going to be
we have to keep
move
moving.
along. Okay, so buy now, pay later. Not a lot to say here that's new. I just wanted to point out it's still there. It's still crazy and still unregulated, and we still don't see much of it reported to credit bureaus. We're all still working on what that looks like. We're working on including them in our credit reports. We're not seeing a lot of it yet because we're not sure exactly how to include it and what it's going to do. So keep an eye on that. Still worry me. Public records, I wanted to touch on this really quickly. Because I hear people misspeak about this. Credit reports have removed all public records with the exception of bankruptcy. So if you look at a credit report, you will no longer see unpaid tax liens. You will no longer see paid tax liens. You will not see civil judgments. So if you're sued and you lose, you won't see parking tickets. You won't see library fines. I haven't seen library fines for about 23 years. They took them off about 3 years after I started with the company, but they were used to be there. So you won't see any public records whatsoever other than chapter, I didn't get that change. It should say chapter 7 bankruptcy and chapter 13 bankruptcy. Public records will remain. However, when your credit report is reviewed, while those will not affect credit scores traditionally, and they're not part of a credit report, it doesn't mean that lenders don't have access to them. As soon as we took them off, other companies like LexisNexis started to collect that data. So it still could be considered in application review. So it's something to keep in mind that there are other organizations, data aggregators that may have that information, and it may still be used in background checks and in approval processes and things, but it wouldn't come from Experian, TransUnion, or Equifax. So just wanted to share that, make that clear. And then of course we have resources. You can get your free report once a week at annualcreditreport.com from each of the 3 national credit reporting companies. We're continuing that through the end of the year, perhaps longer. I'm not sure yet, but we're in discussions around that. And we have a number of resources that are available. We have a cool flip book now that is really kind of fun. And I'll stop there, Rita, and I'll stop sharing and turn it back over to you.
Okay, let me take it back from you, Rod. Thank you. That was really wonderful. I know that everyone got so much out of it. So I will quickly go through my finishing portion of this so we can look at some of the questions that came in. So a few final thoughts that I always look forward to sharing with those who attend any of our trainings. We know that no one chooses to have money problems, but sadly, most people do. So the good news is that no one can or needs to know everything about money. However, everyone needs to know certain things about money. And everyone has a relationship with money and with self, and most need healed. Think about it. We all have a relationship with our money and with ourselves. Healing your relationship with yourself takes time, honesty, less self-criticism, and more self-love. And healing that relationship with your money begins with those thoughts, feelings, attitudes, values, and experience we each have with money. When we talk about money, what are we really talking about? We're talking about survival, safety, security, and power. Those who have the money have the power. So we never want to stop working to make peace and make friends with our money. Money is not the enemy. When we consider it the enemy, we avoid it, and that's not a good thing. If we want to stop raising generation after generation of financially illiterate men and women, we need to prepare our children for the real world by teaching them more about money. And that isn't really happening in the schools today. There exists too strong a relationship between finances and suicide. That shouldn't and doesn't have to be a death sentence. Always choose life. So we have some additional resources for you. Our next month free webinar is on what to know about student loans and debt before, during, and after college. And after that, in October, technology for social work. Is digital banking guilty of financial discrimination? We hope to see you there. We also have our financial health and wellness professional community, and it's one of my very favorite things where we bring people together to interact, learn, network, connect, expand client resources, and support each other across diverse client populations. We also have a partner program. If you refer someone and they use your link, you get 10% of that sale and they save 10%. And brand new, just this month, we introduced our client financial wellness magazine. It's a turnkey approach. And it's so exciting. We've gotten a great response to it because it engages clients on a monthly basis with their money and with your organization. And we have a $100 launch code at checkout for the Client Financial Wellness Magazine. It's 12 issues. We currently are offering pay what you can for our certification, so you can see what those costs look like. It's kind of an honor system. If you can't afford the full price, pay what you can. So here we are. We have finished, and we have a few minutes to take some Q&A. Olga, you want to, do we have questions?
Yes, we have. Okay. Does it negatively impact your credit score to pay minimum amount instead of your bill in full?
If you're making the minimum amount due, making that minimum amount payment due, that's considered current, so it's not going to hurt your credit scores in that sense. If your balance is increasing as a result, which is quite possible because you're going to have interest payments that are, or interest amounts that are added to your balance. So if you're making minimum payments due, you should see a decrease, but if you make other charges, you see interest rates, interest fees added, and your balance is increasing, it's going to offset that because now your utilization rate's going up. So there's never just one thing, but making minimum payment due is really the minimum that you can do to make sure that your payments are reported as current. But then you have to look at what's happening to the balance on a credit card. Is it increasing because you're still making charges? Is it increasing because there are other rates and fees associated with that as well? And is your utilization increasing? Because if your utilization is going up, then your score is going to come down. Ideally, I should finish with that because that's the best thing you can do.
Okay.
Next question. Can you give a rough idea of how much less medical collections impact scores versus other collections?
Yeah, it depends on, I can't really give you a percentage or points difference. It depends on the scoring model that's used. It depends on the individual's credit history as a whole, and that's the challenge. You know, everybody would love to be able to say, well, if you make this change, everybody would see a X points change, but it doesn't really work that way. Scores are looking at each item in the report in relation to everything else. So if a person has an absolutely fantastic credit history, but one medical collection, it would have less effect on their scores than, for instance, for example, a person who has, you know, 2 collection accounts and a medical debt. You know, so it's going to be, or has delinquencies in a medical debt. So it's, you know, it's going to differ. The other interesting thing about scores is that the higher your scores are, the more they tend to drop in terms of points relative to any given item. So, for example, if you have an 840 and you had a late payment, your score might drop 40 points. But if you have a score of 620 and you have a late payment, your score might drop 10 points or 20 points. It depends on, depending on credit history. The reason is that you have less to fall. If you have that 620, you already have other late payments and things, so it's less meaningful in relation to the score. If you miss a late payment, you have really high scores, there's more to fall. And then you look at the real impact. If you have an 840 and your score drops to 820 or 830 or 800 or 790, you're still going to qualify for whatever you apply for. It's still a fantastic score. So the real impact is in many ways more important than the point change.
What is the difference between FICO score and the credit score? Are they one and the same?
No, they're two different companies. So they both create credit scoring models. So the way I kind of describe it is, you think about Ford and Chevrolet, they both build trucks. They do it similarly, but a bit differently. And you know, if you're a Chevy person, you like Chevy trucks because it meets your specific needs as a customer better than the Ford does, and vice versa. Credit scores are kind of the same. They are creating credit algorithms, but the way they create the algorithms to predict the risk of default are a little different. So the way they look at the information and the way the algorithm, the score's calculated is a bit different, and they compete on the ability to predict the risk that a person will repay a debt as agreed. So if a lender's looking at a Vantage score or FICO score, what they want to know is, if I have one consumer, which one of those scores, based on my particular lending needs, will ensure that I'm approving people that will meet my criteria and not approving those who don't. And so they compete on, basically, on the ability to predict whether a person will repay a debt as agreed, and on the predictiveness of their score. So they're competitors, just like Ford and Chevrolet are, or Experian and Equifax.
When a line of credit is closed by the creditor without requesting it, does that impact your score?
The fact that it's closed by the creditor rather than you does not anymore. That used to be an issue. It no longer is. People open and close accounts so often that that particular fact doesn't affect scores really in any meaningful way any longer. You know, I have accounts that I've had that the creditors closed because I simply don't use them. So just kind of forgot I even had them put in, you know, a safe or a locked drawer somewhere. And, oh yeah, I forgot I used it. I don't go there anymore. And some of them I've decided to keep open, so make a charge. Some of them I let close. When you close an account, particularly a credit card, when they close that account, you will lose the available credit limit for that account. That will cause your total utilization to increase, and that will cause your scores to drop temporarily. So that's what actually causes the score change, is not the fact that a lender closed it or you did, but that you no longer have the available credit limit for that card, and therefore your total utilization, as a matter of mathematics, increases. Typically, scores bounce back in a matter of 2 or 3 months because it's clear that you didn't take on more debt, you just closed an account. But that's the real issue, is the change to your utilization.
Any advice on establishing business credit? I have a LLC.
Yeah, several things. One, make sure your business is registered. If you have an LLC, it is. Open a business, go to a lender and open a business credit account if you can. And when you do that, we will create a business credit report. Experian has a business credit reporting division, and we actually specialize in small business. We compete with Dun & Bradstreet in a fairly small way at this point, but we will automatically create a credit history for you once you're registered and as a business, and there's an account to report. So fairly straightforward.
Rita, do we have a time yet?
All right, this will have to be the last one.
Okay. Is the Vantage score being more accepted by banks and lenders now than before?
Yes, it is growing, and the shift in the mortgage market is suggesting that they may have a growing market. The reality is they compete with FICO very directly. FICO is predominant still, but Vantage Score its acceptance, its use is growing. And the reality is, what people often don't know is that banks typically use more than one score when they're evaluating an application. So they may use multiple FICO scores. They may use a FICO score and a Vantage Score when they're doing the application review. So when you see that, the marketing claim that FICO is used by 90% of the largest banks in the country, Vantage Score makes a similar claim. They're just used differently. So it's they're actually competing. FICO is still predominant, but Vantage Score is gaining market share from what I've seen.
Okay, Rod, thank you so much. This was wonderful. It always is. And I so appreciate your being here for us. I know our audience does too. And we hope to see you back here next year with more updates. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we hope to see you back here on the second Thursday of each month. And you can register at financialsocialwork.com. Have a beautiful rest of the day, everyone. Bye now.
Thank you, Rita.
Thanks, Rod.